You're going to be my wife one day." She laughed at me, but 15 years later, I came back for her. The dust of that corral still sticks to my memory, thick and gritty. I was just a boy, all knees and elbows, with a heart too big for my chest. She was something else entirely. She moved like a storm rolling in, all confidence and fire, with hair the color of sunburnt hay. The ranch hands called her a spitfire. I called her my future. So I said the words. "You're going to be my wife one day," I told her, my voice cracking right down the middle. The laughter started in her eyes, a dangerous little glint. Then it spilled out, bright and cruel, echoing off the fence posts. The stable boys howled. The seasoned ranch hands chuckled into their fists. The whole world, it seemed, was laughing at the foolish boy who dared to dream. She leaned against the fence, sunlight catching the dust motes dancing around her. "You're still just a child," she said. Her words were honey, but they stung like a hornet. My face burned hot enough to bake clay. I saw the pity in some eyes, the mockery in most. But in hers, I saw something worse. Indifference. I turned before the tears could betray me, but I couldn't outrun the sound. Her laughter followed me, branded itself onto my soul. It was the last thing I heard as I left that town behind, with nothing but a stolen biscuit and the clothes on my back. That night, under a blanket of cold, unblinking stars, the shame curdled into something else, something hard and sharp, a vow, not just whispered into the wind but carved into my heart. 15 years, and I'll come back a man she'll never laugh at again. The West has a way of turning boys into men, but it's a brutal teacher. It beat me, froze me, and starved me. I rode through storms that swallowed the sky and crossed deserts that bled a man dry. I learned the language of a revolver and the cold math of survival. The boy who trembled in that corral died somewhere on a cattle trail in a flash flood. The man who walked out of the water carried his name, his scars, and his vow. Her laughter became a compass. Every time I wanted to quit, to lay down and die, I heard it, and I got back up. I pushed harder. I grew colder. The world stopped seeing a boy. They saw a threat, a tool, a survivor. They saw a man who never, ever backed down. And through it all, I wondered about her. Had time been kind? Did she ever think of that dusty afternoon? Did she even remember my name? 15 years passed. The land changed. Men died. Towns boomed and busted. But my vow remained. And then, one day, the trail led back home. But I didn't ride in on a fine horse, pockets lined with gold. I came back in chains. The townsfolk gathered as the wagon rolled down the main street. They stared, their faces a mix of curiosity and scorn. There I was, shackled and bruised, flanked by deputies. The man leading them walked tall, a silver star gleaming on his chest. He was handsome, confident, the kind of man fathers approved of and sons envied. He stopped the wagon right in front of the general store. And that's when I saw her. She stood on the porch, older, but just as fierce. The years had carved a hardness into her face, but they hadn't touched the fire in her eyes. She carried herself like a queen surveying her domain, her gaze sweeping over the scene with a cool detachment, until her eyes met mine. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The crowd, the dust, the clinking of my chains, it all faded away. I saw a flicker of something in her expression. Not recognition. Not yet. Something deeper, a ghost of a memory. The man with the star dismounted. He strode over to her, his spurs jingling with authority. He smiled, a possessive, confident smile, and placed a hand on the small of her back. "Another piece of trash for the gallows, my dear," he said, his voice loud enough for the whole town to hear. "This one's the worst of the lot. A killer they call the Dust Devil." She didn't look at him. Her eyes were still locked on me. The man, Sheriff Clayton, followed her gaze. His smile tightened. "Don't you worry your pretty head about him. He won't be a problem for long." He grabbed my chains and hauled me from the wagon. I stumbled, landing hard in the dirt. The same dirt from 15 years ago. The crowd laughed. A new chorus of laughter, but the same old sting. I looked up from the ground, past the sheriff's polished boots, right at her. And in the dead silence that followed the laughter, I spoke. My voice was a low rasp, broken by thirst and beatings, but every single person heard it. I told you I'd come back for you. The sheriff's face went rigid. A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd as memory dawned on their faces. They remembered the boy. They remembered the vow. But it was her reaction that stopped my heart. Her face went pale as bone, the cool detachment shattered, replaced by a storm of emotions I couldn't read. Fear, shock, and something else. Something that looked terrifyingly like recognition. The sheriff's hand went to his gun. "What did you say?" he growled. I didn't take my eyes off her. It's been 15 years, Abigail. Her name on my lips was a spark in a powder keg. Sheriff Clayton spun around, his face a mask of fury. He saw the look on her face, the way her hands were clenched at her sides. He saw the connection, the invisible thread that stretched across 15 years of dust and blood, and he didn't like it one bit. "You know this scum?" he demanded, his voice dangerously low. Abigail swallowed hard, her pride warring with the shock. He used to work on my father's ranch, a long time ago. He was just a boy." "He's not a boy anymore," Clayton sneered, yanking my chains so hard my teeth rattled. "He's a murderer, and he's going to hang." He shoved me toward the town's small stone jailhouse. But as I passed her, our eyes met one last time. The fear was still there, but beneath it a question was forming. A dangerous question. The heavy oak door of the jail slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing the closing of a tomb. The cell was small, damp, and smelled of despair. Through the single barred window, I could see the main street, the townsfolk still buzzing, their eyes darting from the jail to Abigail, who stood frozen on the porch of the general store. Sheriff Clayton stood with her, his arm now draped protectively around her shoulders. He was talking to her, his expression a careful mix of concern and authority. He was selling her a story, the story of a brave lawman protecting his town and his woman from a savage outlaw. But I had planted a seed of doubt. I saw it in her eyes. The vow wasn't a joke anymore. It was a threat. It was a mystery. And Abigail, the girl who feared nothing, was now afraid of a memory. Hours bled into one another, the sun set, painting the sky in shades of blood and rust. Lanterns flickered to life along the street. A fiddler started a tune in the saloon, a sad, lonely sound that did nothing to lift the heavy blanket of tension over the town. Then she came. She walked alone, a lantern in her hand casting long, dancing shadows. She didn't come to the front door. She came around the side, to my window. Her face was a pale oval in the darkness, her eyes wide and searching. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the chirping of the crickets. "After all this time, why come back like this?" "I didn't have a choice," I said, my voice rough. "The trail ended here." "The trail of a killer?" she shot back, her old fire returning. "Clayton says you murdered a family in cold blood." "Clayton says a lot of things," I rasped, gripping the bars. "Did he also tell you he's trying to buy up every parcel of land in this valley? Did he tell you about the ranchers who mysteriously vanished after refusing to sell to him?" She flinched. The words hit a nerve. "My father refused to sell." "I know," I said softly. "And then a fever took him and your mother. Convenient." Her breath hitched. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the man whose arm you were wearing this afternoon isn't a hero. He's a snake, and he wants your ranch more than anything." "You're a liar," she hissed, but there was no conviction in her voice. "You're a condemned man trying to save his own skin." "Am I?" I leaned closer, my face inches from the bars. "Ask him, Abigail. Ask him about the Black Creek fire. Ask him where he was the night the Miller family disappeared. Just watch his eyes when you say the words." She stared at me, her mind racing. The boy she had mocked was gone. In his place was a man who spoke of darkness she had only ever glimpsed in the shadows of her own grief. Suddenly, a gunshot cracked through the night. It wasn't a celebratory shot from the saloon. It was sharp, deliberate. It was followed by a woman's scream. Then another shot, closer this time. Lights in houses blinked out. The fiddle music died abruptly. Shouts erupted from the street. "Bandits!" someone yelled. "They're coming from the ridge!" Abigail spun around, her face etched with alarm. Through my window, I could see shadows moving on the edge of town. Men on horseback, torches held high, their silhouettes like devils against the night sky. Chaos exploded. The town, so quiet moments before, became a symphony of panic. People ran, horses screamed. The few deputies Clayton had were firing blindly into the darkness. Abigail started to run toward the chaos, toward her ranch on the edge of town. "Abigail, wait!" I shouted through the bars. She paused, looking back at me, her face illuminated by the growing fires. "They aren't here for the town," I yelled, my voice raw with urgency. "They're here for me. It's a setup. Clayton is going to let them burn the town just to make sure I hang for it." Her eyes widened in horror, not at the bandits, but at the sudden, terrifying possibility that I was telling the truth. The attack wasn't random. It was a message, and maybe, just maybe, the real monster wasn't in the jail cell. He was the one wearing the star. The firefight raged. The smell of gunpowder and burning wood filled the air. Sheriff Clayton was a whirlwind of activity, shouting orders, positioning his men, playing the part of the valiant leader. But I could see it from my cell. His defense was a performance. He was letting the bandits push deeper, letting the fires spread, letting the fear mount. He was creating a tragedy that would demand a scapegoat. And I was already in the cage. Abigail watched from the cover of the blacksmith shop, a rifle clutched in her hands. Her face was grim, her eyes darting from the attacking riders to the sheriff. She was seeing what I was seeing, the gaps in the defense, the way Clayton's men were always a step behind, the way the bandits seemed to avoid the sheriff's own properties, focusing their destruction on the smaller ranches, the ones who had resisted his offers. One of the bandits broke from the main group, riding hard toward the jail. He had a torch in his hand. His goal was clear. Burn the evidence. Burn the witness. Burn me. Clayton saw him. He raised his rifle, took aim, and fired into the air, a clean miss. He was letting it happen. Abigail saw it too. The deliberate miss. The cold calculation in her fiancé's eyes. In that instant, the seed of doubt I had planted bloomed into terrifying certainty. She didn't hesitate. She broke cover, running not away from the jail, but toward it. Bullets whizzed past her, kicking up dust at her feet. She ignored them. Her target was the heavy keyring hanging from the belt of a deputy who had been knocked unconscious near the jailhouse door. She scooped them up, her hands shaking, and fumbled with the lock. The bandit was getting closer, the fire from his torch licking at the night. "Abigail, get out of here!" I yelled, rattling the bars. "Not without you," she grunted, finally finding the right key. The lock clicked open with a sound louder than any gunshot. She threw the door open just as the bandit reined in his horse, preparing to toss the torch onto the roof. "I need a gun," I said, stepping out of the cell, my eyes never leaving the rider. She didn't question me. She shoved the rifle she was carrying into my hands. It felt familiar, balanced, a tool I knew better than my own name. I raised it to my shoulder, the stock settling into place as if it were molded for me. The world narrowed to the space between the rifle's sight and the man on the horse. He was grinning, a cruel, ugly slash in his bearded face. He didn't see me as a threat. He saw a man in tattered clothes, an easy kill. I fired. The shot was clean, precise. The bandit jerked backward, the torch falling from his hand and extinguishing in the dirt. He tumbled from his saddle, dead before he hit the ground. Silence fell in our small corner of the chaos. The fighting still raged across town, but here, there was only the ringing in our ears and the heavy weight of what had just happened. Abigail stared at me, her chest heaving. She had just freed a condemned killer, she had just armed him, and she had just watched him kill a man without a flicker of hesitation. "Who are you?" she breathed, the question filled with a new kind of fear. "I'm the man who made you a promise," I said, my eyes scanning the darkness. "And I'm the only one who can save your town." Sheriff Clayton's head snapped in our direction. He saw the dead bandit. He saw the open jail door. He saw me, armed and free, standing beside his fiancée. The mask of the hero fell away, and for a split second, I saw the snake underneath. Pure, cold fury. He raised his pistol, not at the remaining bandits, but at me. "He's an escaping prisoner," Clayton bellowed, his voice ringing with false righteousness. "Shoot to kill." His deputies, loyal or paid, turned their guns. Suddenly, the bandits weren't the only ones trying to kill me. The law was, too. Abigail reacted instinctively, pulling me back into the shadows of the jailhouse alley. "They're going to kill you." "That's been the plan all along," I said grimly, reloading the rifle. "This was never about bandits. It was about tying up loose ends. Me and anyone else who stands in Clayton's way." "What way? What does he want?" she asked, her voice trembling. "He doesn't just want the land, Abigail. He wants the water. The only river that runs through this valley cuts right through your property. Control the water. You control everything. Your ranch is the key." The pieces clicked into place in her mind, forming a picture of greed so vast it was staggering. Her parents hadn't died from a fever. They had been murdered for their water rights. The bandits weren't just marauders, they were employees. And her fiancé, the respected sheriff, was a kingpin building an empire on the bones of his neighbors. "We have to warn the town," she said, her voice hardening. The fear was being replaced by a cold, hard rage. Her father's rage. "They won't believe us," I countered. "Right now, I'm the villain. He's the hero defending them. We need proof. Something undeniable." Another bandit, bolder than the last, charged our position. I dropped to one knee, fired, and he fell. I was moving with a cold efficiency that unnerved her, but there was no time for questions. "The leader of this pack," I said, pulling her deeper into the alley. "A man named Silas. He's got a scar across his left eye. He's the one Clayton deals with directly. If we can get to him, we might find the proof we need." "Get to him? They're trying to burn us out." "Then we'll use their fire against them." I pointed to the livery stable where the flames were now licking at the hayloft. "The smoke will give us cover. We can cut through the back lots, get to the ridge where they're camped. Silas won't be in the thick of the fighting. He'll be watching his men work." It was a crazy plan. A suicidal plan. But looking at the chaos Clayton had unleashed, it was the only plan we had. She looked at me, her eyes searching my face in the flickering firelight. She was seeing the 15 years of hardship, the scars, the coldness in my eyes. She was seeing the killer Clayton claimed I was, but she was also seeing the only person who had told her the truth. "I trust you," she whispered, the words feeling foreign and immense. A vow of her own. "Then stay close," I said, "and don't look back." We plunged into the smoke. It was like stepping into another world, a choking, blinding hell of our own. The sounds of the battle were muffled, surreal. Figures darted through the haze like ghosts. We moved fast, hunched low, using the chaos as our shield. I led the way, the rifle ready. Every instinct I had honed over 15 years was screaming. Every shadow felt like a threat. But behind me, I could hear her steady breathing, her footsteps matching mine. She wasn't the girl from the corral anymore. She was a survivor, hardened by the same land that had forged me. We reached the edge of town, the fires at our back. Ahead of us lay the dark, silent hills. Their camp would be somewhere up there, hidden from view. "He'll have lookouts," she whispered, her voice tight. "I'm counting on it," I replied. We moved into the rocks, the landscape shifting from man-made chaos to natural danger. A stray gunshot from the town below ricocheted off a boulder near my head. Clayton's men were still looking for us. They thought we were cornered rats. They had no idea we were now the hunters. We found the first lookout perched on a high ledge, silhouetted against the moon. He was careless, too focused on the burning town below. I circled around him, silent as a mountain cat. I came up behind him, the cold steel of my knife his only warning. He made no sound as he slumped to the ground. Abigail came up behind me, her eyes wide at the brutal efficiency of it. I saw the question in her eyes again. "Who have you become?" "This is how you survive out here," I said, my voice flat. "There's no room for hesitation." We continued up the ridge, my senses on fire. The air grew colder. The scent of pine and horse manure told me we were close. We heard voices, rough laughter. The bandits' camp was just over the next rise. I held up a hand, stopping her. I crawled the last few feet to the crest of the hill and peered over. It was just as I expected. A dozen men were gathered around a large campfire, drinking whiskey and celebrating. And standing near a tethered horse, apart from the others, was a tall man with a jagged scar bisecting his left eyebrow. Silas. He wasn't celebrating. He was arguing with another man, a man who was supposed to be in town leading the defense. It was one of Clayton's deputies. "The sheriff ain't gonna like this," the deputy was saying, his voice laced with fear. "Losing the prisoner? He'll have our hides." Silas spat into the fire. "The sheriff can handle his own problems. I was paid to create a diversion, not to hold a killer's hand. We got what we came for." He patted a heavy set of saddlebags slung over his horse. "What is that?" the deputy asked. Silas grinned, a predator's smile. He opened one of the bags. Even from my distance, I could see the glint of metal, not coins. It was a metal lockbox. Abigail's breath hitched beside me. I knew without asking. It was her father's. The one that held the deed to her ranch and the water rights. "The prize," Silas said with a chuckle. "Clayton gets the land, I get what's inside. A fair trade." We had our proof. Not just a spoken confession, but the stolen deed itself. But it was on the other side of a dozen armed killers. "What do we do?" Abigail breathed, her eyes fixed on the lockbox that held her entire life. "We do something they'll never expect," I said, a grim plan forming in my mind. "We bring the fire to them." I looked back down at the burning livery stable. An idea, wild and desperate, took shape. "The horses," I said, "the ones still trapped in the stable. If we can spook them, send them stampeding up this hill." It was a long shot, a crazy shot, but it was the only one we had. "I'll go," she said, her voice firm. "They're my horses. They'll respond to me. You stay here. Get that box." I stared at her. The thought of her going back into that fire, that chaos, twisted my gut. But I saw the resolve in her eyes. This was her fight, too. She wasn't asking for my permission. "Be careful," I said, the words feeling small and useless. "You too," she replied, and then she was gone, a shadow melting back into the night. I was alone again, the boy from the corral watching her walk away. But this time was different. This time she was walking into the fire for me, for us. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The bandits grew louder, more drunk. Silas and the deputy were still arguing. Any moment, they could finish their business and ride off. Then I heard it, a faint rumble from the town below. It grew louder, a deep, thundering noise that shook the very ground. The bandits stopped laughing. They looked at each other, confused. The rumble became a roar, and then they came. A river of horseflesh, eyes wide with terror, manes and tails flying, stampeding up the hill. They burst from the smoke and shadows, a living avalanche of panic and muscle. Abigail had done it. The bandit camp exploded into chaos. Men screamed and dove for cover as the horses tore through their campfire, scattering embers and sending tents flying. It was the perfect diversion. I didn't wait. I broke from cover, a ghost in the confusion. My target was Silas's horse, the one with the saddlebags. I vaulted over a rock, landed silently, and sprinted through the mayhem. Silas saw me at the last second. His eyes widened, the scar on his face twisting in surprise. He drew his pistol, but he was too slow. I crashed into him, driving my shoulder into his chest. We went down in a tangle of limbs, the lockbox flying from the saddlebags and skittering across the dirt. We rolled, fists flying. He was strong, a brute used to barroom brawls. But I was faster, fueled by 15 years of rage. I landed a punch that snapped his head back, then another. He grunted, trying to bring his gun around. The deputy, seeing his chance, drew his own weapon and aimed it at my back. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from the deputy's gun. He cried out, clutching his shoulder, his pistol clattering to the ground. I glanced up. On the ridge, Abigail stood against the moonlight, the rifle smoking in her hands. Her aim was true. The distraction was all I needed. I twisted the gun from Silas's hand and brought the butt of it down hard on his temple. He went limp. I scrambled for the lockbox, my fingers closing around the cold metal. I had it. The proof. But our victory was short-lived. The stampede was passing. The remaining bandits were regrouping, their shock turning to anger. And from down the hill, I heard a familiar voice bellowing orders. Sheriff Clayton. He and his men were coming up the ridge. We were trapped, caught between the outlaws and the corrupt law. "This way," Abigail yelled, pointing toward a narrow crevice in the rocks I hadn't seen before. "It's an old prospector's tunnel. It leads to the other side of the mountain." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the stunned deputy, hauling him to his feet. "You're coming with us," I growled. He would be our insurance policy, our witness. We scrambled for the tunnel entrance as the first of Clayton's men crested the hill. A bullet chipped the rock beside my head. We plunged into the absolute darkness of the tunnel, the sounds of shouting and gunfire fading behind us. The air was cold and damp, the ground uneven. We stumbled through the blackness, Abigail holding my hand, the deputy shoved ahead of us. We had the proof. We had a witness. But we were fugitives, buried alive in the heart of the mountain, with the most powerful man in the valley hunting us. The vow I had made as a boy had led me here, to this darkness. But for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't alone in it. The tunnel was a cold, black throat swallowing us whole. Every drip of water, every skittering pebble under our boots, sounded like a gunshot. I kept a firm grip on the deputy, his fear a palpable thing in the dark. Abigail held the lockbox, her other hand gripping my arm, a silent anchor in the suffocating blackness. "How far does this go?" I whispered, my voice swallowed by the stone. "All the way through," she answered, her voice steady. "My father showed it to me when I was a girl. He said if things ever got too bad, the mountain would provide a way out." Her voice broke a little on the last words. Her father hadn't known just how bad things would get. We walked for what felt like days. The deputy, whose name we learned was Miller, started to babble. He was young, scared, in way over his head. He confessed everything, how Clayton had recruited him, promising him a share of the profits, how Clayton had orchestrated the bandit raids to scare people into selling. And the worst part, he confirmed my darkest suspicion. "The fever," Miller whimpered. "It wasn't a fever. It was poison. Clayton had a man sneak into the well on your folks' ranch, ma'am. He was tired of your pa saying no." Abigail stopped dead. The lockbox slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the rock floor. The sound was deafening. I couldn't see her face in the darkness, but I felt a tremor run through her entire body. a wave of grief and rage so profound it seemed to suck the very air from the tunnel. I pulled her close, holding her as silent, racking sobs shook her frame. 15 years of pride, of strength, of solitude, all came crashing down in that one horrific revelation. She had mourned her parents, but she had never known the truth of their departure. They hadn't just been taken. They had been stolen from her. I let her cry. I let the poison out. And when the sobs subsided, replaced by a cold, deadly calm, I knew the girl was truly gone. In her place was an avenger. "He will pay for what he did," she said, her voice like chipping ice. It wasn't a wish. It was a promise. We kept moving. At last we saw it. A pinprick of gray light ahead. The exit. We emerged, blinking, into the pale light of dawn on the far side of the mountain. The valley stretched out below us, peaceful and serene, a stark contrast to the burning town we had left behind. "What now?" Miller asked, his eyes wide with the terror of a man who knows he's on the losing side. "Clayton will have men covering every road." "We're not taking the roads," I said, looking at the treacherous wooded landscape. "And we're not running." Abigail looked at me, her eyes clear and hard. "We're going back." "We can't," Miller stammered. "He'll kill us all." "He's going to try," I said. "But he thinks we're scared. He thinks we're hiding. He's not expecting us to bring the fight to him." I looked at Abigail. "The town won't believe my word against his, but they might believe yours, and they will believe him." I nodded toward Miller. The plan was simple and insane. We would go back to town not in the dead of night but in broad daylight. We would walk right down the main street. We would force a confrontation in front of everyone. Clayton's power came from his public image as a hero. We were going to shatter it. It took us the rest of the day to circle back, moving through the dense woods that bordered the valley. We were exhausted, hungry, and running on pure adrenaline. As dusk began to settle, we stood on a hill overlooking the town. The fires were out, but the scars remained. Blackened buildings, broken windows. The town looked wounded, violated. And in the center of it all, in the sheriff's office, Clayton was cementing his power. We could see him talking to a group of men, gesturing, giving orders. He was a king in his castle. "He's organized a posse," Miller whispered, "to hunt us down. He told the town you kidnapped Miss Abigail after you killed those men." "He's a fool," Abigail said, her voice devoid of emotion. "He thinks I'm a prize to be won or stolen. He never understood me at all." She looked at me. My father kept a spare shotgun under the floorboards of the tack room, and ammunition. An hour later, under the cover of darkness, we slipped into the familiar chaos of her ranch. The main house was untouched, but a few of the outer sheds had been burned. A message from Clayton. We found the shotgun and a box of shells. We also found some old, tough riding clothes for Abigail and a canteen of water. We had our witness. We had our proof in the lockbox. And now we had our weapons. The sun rose on a tense, grieving town. People were sweeping up debris, boarding windows, talking in hushed, fearful tones. They were looking for a leader, and Clayton was ready to give them one. He gathered everyone in the town square. He stood on the steps of the saloon, looking grim and determined. "The outlaw known as the Dust Devil has escaped," he announced, his voice booming with authority. "He has taken one of our own, Miss Abigail, as his hostage. But I will not rest until I bring him to justice and return her safely. I am leading a posse, and we will hunt him to the ends of the earth." The crowd murmured its approval. They saw a hero, strong and decisive. "Are you sure about that, Sheriff?" My voice cut through the air, clear and cold. Every head snapped toward the end of the street. There we stood. Me, Abigail, and the Deputy Miller, who I held by the collar. I held the shotgun in my other hand. Abigail held the lockbox. We started walking, slow and deliberate, down the middle of the street. The posse members, who had been mounting their horses, froze. The townsfolk gasped, backing away, clearing a path. It was like the parting of the Red Sea. Clayton's face was a masterpiece of controlled fury. His jaw tightened, and his hand instinctively went to the gun on his hip. "Abigail!" he shouted, feigning relief. "Thank God you're safe. Get away from him!" Abigail didn't move. She just stared at him, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost visible. "Safe?" she said, her voice ringing out across the silent square. "You mean safe like my parents were, Clayton? Safe in the ground?" A wave of confusion rippled through the crowd. Clayton's mask slipped. A flicker of panic crossed his eyes. "What nonsense are you talking? That killer has filled your head with lies." "Has he?" I said, shoving Miller forward. He stumbled and fell to his knees in the dirt. "Then why don't you tell them, son? Tell them who you work for. Tell them who gave the orders to burn this town." Miller was trembling, caught between two monsters. But he looked at Clayton's cold, murderous eyes, and then at Abigail's grieving, determined face, and he made his choice. "It was him," Miller choked out, pointing a shaking finger at the sheriff. "It was all him, the bandits, the fires, everything. He hired Silas. He wanted the land." The crowd gasped. Clayton went pale. "The boy is lying. He's trying to save his own neck." "Is he?" Abigail stepped forward, holding up the lockbox. "Then maybe this will convince you. This is my father's lockbox. It was stolen last night by Silas, the bandit leader, the same man this deputy saw taking orders and payment from Sheriff Clayton." She opened the box and pulled out a thick stack of papers. The deed, her birthright. "He did it all for this. He murdered my family for a piece of paper." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. The townsfolk looked from Abigail's tear-streaked, furious face to the sheriff's crumbling composure. They were starting to believe. The pieces were fitting together. The strange fires, the ranchers who had left, the sheriff's growing wealth. Clayton knew he was losing. There was only one way out for him now. Violence. "He's a liar, and she's a hysterical woman," he roared, finally drawing his gun. "I am the law here." But as he raised his pistol, something shifted in the crowd. They weren't just scared sheep anymore. They were angry. These were their homes that had burned, their friends who had been terrorized. The old blacksmith, a man whose shop had been reduced to cinders, stepped forward. He was holding a heavy hammer. "The law doesn't poison its neighbors, Clayton." Another man stepped forward, and another. They weren't armed with guns, but with tools, with fury, with the righteous anger of betrayed people. Clayton was surrounded. His posse, seeing the tide turn, hesitated, their loyalty dissolving like sugar in the rain. He was trapped, and he knew it. His eyes, wild and desperate, locked onto me. This was all my fault. I was the ghost who had come back to unravel his empire. "This is between you and me," he snarled, pointing his gun at my chest. "It always has been," I said, raising the shotgun. The street fell silent. The whole town held its breath. It was back to where it started. A vow, a man, and a woman. But the corral was now a town square, and the prize wasn't just a heart, but justice. He fired. But I was faster. The 15 years in the wild had taught me that hesitation is death. The shotgun bucked in my hands, its roar echoing off the buildings. Clayton staggered backward, a look of pure shock on his face. He clutched his shoulder, his gun falling from his numb fingers. He wasn't dead. I hadn't given him the clean exit he would have given me. I gave him a future of staring at prison walls, remembering the day a boy's vow came back to haunt him. The townsfolk surged forward, surrounding him, their faces hard with a justice that no star could defy. It was over. I lowered the shotgun, the smoke curling into the morning air. My eyes found Abigail. She was standing there, the lockbox clutched to her chest, tears streaming down her face. But these weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of justice. I walked toward her, through the crowd, through the wreckage of our past. I stopped in front of her, the same distance as that day in the corral. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. Not as a boy, not as an outlaw, but as the man who had crossed deserts and stared down death to keep a promise. "You came back," she whispered. "I told you I would," I said. She didn't laugh this time. Instead, a slow smile spread across her face, a real smile, one that reached her eyes and erased the years of hardship. She took a step closer and laid a hand on my chest, right over my heart. "Welcome home." And that's how a foolish vow, spoken in the dust by a humiliated boy, became a promise kept. It wasn't about possessing her or winning a prize. It was about becoming a man worthy of standing by her side, a man she would never laugh at again. The laughter had been silenced, replaced by the quiet, steady beat of two hearts that had found their way back to each other across 15 years of silence, scars, and smoke. If this story moved you, don't just ride off into the sunset. Become part of the family. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another tale from the wild heart of the past. And let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight?